US President Donald Trump's threat to implement reciprocal tariffs has been sending shockwaves to the Indian sports sectors from agriculture to automobiles.
India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth.
The Indian stock market has already reacted by committing to record lows, even marking its longest monthly losing streak in the last 29 years. According to Citi research analysts, the Indian economy could take a massive $7 billion hit if these tariffs go into effect. So, what does this mean for you? Stay with me in this video, and by the end, you will get to know what exactly are reciprocal tariffs, how these reciprocal tariffs impact the export and import of India, which sectors will suffer the most if these reciprocal tariffs are implemented, will the stock market crash further, and above all, will India be able to fight back, or is a major economic shift coming? Before we try to understand the Trump's reciprocal tariffs, we should try and understand clearly what exactly are these import duties or import taxes or tariffs, as we say that. We should know who pays them, how do they impact the prices of goods, and most importantly, how does it affect you? So, if you're aware of the import taxes and the tariffs, please skip to the next section in the timeline where I start explaining about the reciprocal tariffs. Every time a business or an individual in a country A imports a product from a country B, then the government of the country A where the product is imported can charge a tax on it. So this tax is the import duty or the tariff that the government charges on the imported goods or the products. So who pays this tax? Many people think that the exporting country pays this tax, but this is not true. So the importing business or the importing individual pays the tax to its government. And guess what? Generally, the businesses or the individual who import the goods pass this extra cost to the consumers, and hence you end up paying more for the same goods you were buying earlier. So there are many reasons to impose the import taxes on foreign goods, but generally it is imposed to increase the price of the foreign goods so that the domestic goods are more cheaper and attractive to the consumers. If you're still not clear, let's take an example. So let's say you are trying to buy a Harley Davidson bike in India. And let's say the Harley Davidson bike costs 12,000 US dollar, which is equivalent to rupees 10 lakh approximately in the United States of America. Now, as we know, the import duties on foreign bikes in India is 40%. So this means that if an Indian dealer imports a Harley Davidson bike, then it will have to pay the government an extra 40% as the import duty. So this means the price jumps from a mere 10 lakh to 10 lakh plus 40% of 10 lakh, equating to 14 lakh in total, even before dealer margins and other costs. So, what is the final result? The final result is that a Harley Davidson bike becomes too costly in India, and the Indian brands like the Royal Enfield becomes more affordable to the Indian consumers. Hence, to conclude, the import taxes are not paid by the exporting country; it is paid by the businesses which import these goods, and these businesses generally pass on these prices to the consumers. That's why tariffs directly impact you, whether you are buying a bike or food products or everyday essentials like medicines. So now that we understand import duties and tariffs, let's move to reciprocal tariffs. Let's understand what these reciprocal tariffs are all about. Reciprocal tariffs, as Trump puts it, whatever a country charges us, we charge them back. Sounds fair, right? But there is little more to it. So let's try and break it down with some simple examples. So let us again consider the classic example of the US bikes versus Indian bikes. So right now, India charges a 40% import duty on foreign bikes. Let me know in the comments if this has changed when this video is published. However, the United States of America charges a 2.4% tariff on the bikes that it imports from India. Hence, if Trump reciprocates by imposing reciprocal tariffs on Indian bikes, then a tariff of 40% will be imposed on Indian bikes imported in the United States of America. And if you observe, this is similar in other goods that the US imports from India. Another example you can think of is the Indian medicines. So currently, while I'm making this video, the United States of America does not charge any import duty on the Indian medicines it imports. And India exports 47% of its generic medicines to the USA. So on the contrary, India imposes a 5 to 10% of import duties on the medicines it imports from United States of America, USA. So hence, if reciprocal tariffs are implemented by Trump on the pharmaceuticals or medicines also, then Trump could charge a similar 5 to 10% of import duties on the medicines that it imports from India. Hence, the price of the Indian medicines will increase in the US and their competitiveness in the US market will reduce or decrease. But here's the real kicker, it's not just about the tariffs. So there are two possible ways in which Trump can apply these reciprocal tariffs. So the first is direct tariff matching. You tax our goods and we tax your goods. So if India charges a 30% tariff on the US auto parts, Trump matches it with a 30% tariff on the auto parts it imports from India. So in fact, the Indian exporters might lose the price advantage they have in the US and they may lose to technically more sound US products. The second scenario is when Trump implements tariffs plus some red tape sanctions also. So it will make the trade even harder. So here the US can add trade barriers like import licenses and export restrictions. For example, Indian pharmaceutical companies exporting medicines to the US could face stricter FDA approvals, delaying shipments, and making them less competitive. So Trump's reciprocal tariffs aren't just about a fair trade. They could make Indian exports more expensive, disrupt businesses, and shake up the Indian economy. But which sectors exactly will be impacted the most by these reciprocal tariffs? Let's get into it. First, we need to understand that there are two broader scenarios in which the current situation can unfold, and we need to take account of both the scenarios. So, the first scenario is when the US actually implements the reciprocal tariffs. And there is another scenario, scenario number two, where the US does not implement or impose the reciprocal tariffs because India is able to negotiate terms with the US and hence US does not impose the reciprocal tariffs. So we should be able to find the impacts in both of these scenarios one by one. So first is, as we said, let's say USA actually implements the reciprocal tariffs. So in this scenario, industries which rely heavily on exporting their products to the US will suffer. The prices of the goods in these industries will rise due to the tariffs and hence will become less competitive in the US markets. So these high prices will likely lead to reduced demand and lower sales. In 2023, India exported a whopping $85.5 billion worth of goods to the US. Some of the key products we exported were medicines, diamonds, and broadcasting equipments. So let us first talk about the medicines or the pharmaceutical sector. So India is the largest supplier of generic medicines to the US. About 40% of the generic medicines that the US imports comes from India. So if Trump increases the tariffs on these general medicines or the generic medicines, then the American consumers may turn to local suppliers or maybe Chinese suppliers for that matter. So other sectors that might get impacted if the reciprocal tariffs are implemented are the cut and polish diamonds sector, food, automobile, and even the broadcasting equipments as we saw earlier. Now let's talk about the second scenario where India is able to negotiate terms with the United States of America and hence the reciprocal tariffs are not implemented. In this case, India will need to reduce its import duties and tariffs on the goods it imports from the US, because this is the only way through which a trade war can be avoided. Like we already can see that India has reduced the import duties on high end motorcycles like the Harley Davidson we were talking about from a 50% to 30%, and on the imported whiskies from 150% to 100%. So these import duties have been reduced by the Indian government on the imported whiskies and imported bikes from US. Like now you might know that how you are getting cheaper Harley Davidson and Jack Daniel whiskey in India. But this lowering of the import duties on the US products can create another problem. It could create a fierce competition for the Indian domestic products from these US imported products. In this scenario, the goods which the US exports to India will impact the Indian counterparts. Like the US whiskey will impact the sale of Indian whiskies, and the Harley Davidson will impact the sale of Royal Enfield in India. I mean, just think of a scenario where General Motors Hummer or a Ford Mustang would be available to you at cheaper rates than before in India. And this is because you know that the import duties on these products have been reduced by the Indian government. But, if you ask me, India, if it reduces the tariffs on the US products, would not face too much impact because India anyway does not import much of the US products. So instead of engaging in a trade war, India might have a smarter option to negotiate terms with the US and reduce tariffs on some of the imported goods from the United States of America. So let me explain that further to you. So in 2023, India exported $85.5 billion worth of goods and services to the US, and it imported $41.4 billion of goods and services from the US. So we are in a trade surplus with the US. Trade surplus basically meaning that we are exporting more and importing less from the US, right? So if the US imposes tariffs on the Indian products that it imports, India will take bigger impact. But if India reduces tariffs on the US goods which it imports, it gets the negotiation power and it can keep its industry safe. And why won't it hurt the Indian businesses? Because the US imports to India are much lower in volume, and hence the impact on the domestic industries are minimal. In fact, many US goods aren't practical for the Indian consumers, like the large SUVs, expensive gadgets, and the processed foods. These are not for the Indian consumers. So even if these products become cheaper, Indian consumers will still prefer the local alternatives because of affordability also and brand familiarity. Hence, instead of escalating a tariff war, India could negotiate and strategically lower the tariffs on certain US imported goods to protect the Indian economy and the industries, the local industries. Smart move, right? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section. So the stock market has already reacted to the threat of US reciprocal tariffs on India. But will this panic continue or is there a way out? The answer, of course, lies in how India negotiates and strategizes its next moves. But here's the real question. Will the global investors still see India as a favorable growing market, or will they start looking elsewhere like a China? So the world is shifting towards innovation led economies. China has already recognized this, and it is no longer a cheap manufacturing hub which produces cheap and low quality products in large volumes. Instead, it is now focused on producing quality products and investing heavily in AI, advanced technology, and research and development. China's latest AI innovation, DeepSeek, proves the fact that how fast China is moving from a volume based manufacturing economy to a innovation and quality driven economy. So, if India wants to stay attractive to investors, it also needs to step up its game. First, it will need to invest in innovation and research and development. India needs to invest and fund cutting edge research and development in AI, biotech, and advanced technologies. The current budget in India already focuses on boosting innovation and artificial intelligence in India. But we need bigger moves. Check out my video on India's push to AI and is that enough? So I discuss here whether the push that is given by the government in artificial intelligence is enough or not as compared to what other countries are doing. The other thing that I feel that India should do, apart from investing in research and development and advanced technologies, is also to look beyond the United States of America for its trade partners. We should look out for European Union nations and Japan and China to foster and develop our trading relationships. We just cannot rely on the US. As we can see, the US has implemented 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, who were its longest standing partners. We should also try and leverage our domestic market. With 1.4 billion people, India itself is one of the biggest consumer markets in the world. If we can focus more on domestic demands, industries can thrive more without being overly dependent on exports. If India plays its cards right by investing in innovation, expanding its trade ties, and strengthening the local or domestic industries and domestic consumption, the stock market will not only recover, but it will thrive. See, the short term impact is volatility, but the long term impact depends on how India tackles the situation, how India invests in innovation, how India strengthens its local consumption and local industries, how it develops new trade ties with different other countries other than the US. So all these things will decide the future of India's growth and also will decide the future of stock markets. Although I think the Indian government realizes this and this new budget does mention and does capture all these initiatives. So if you ask me, I can say that the stock market will recover, but of course it will take some time amidst the growing uncertainties in the geopolitical and economic scenario in the world, like the looming tariff threats, the reciprocal tariffs that we are talking about, then US sanctions on Russia, US sanctions on India also, I think, and Russia Ukraine war. So all these things sum up to one thing that there is growing uncertainty for the time being in the world geopolitical and economic order. But once these improve, first we will recover, the stock market will recover. Now the important question, can India fight back or is there a major economic shift happening? If you ask me, this is pretty uncertain at this point of time because there are many variables that we have to consider. A lot depends on how exactly the US implements these tariffs. Will they be moderate or will they be aggressive? Whether Trump also imposes extra red tape to make trade harder. And last but not the least, India's ability to negotiate a balanced deal to minimize the damage caused. In fact, there is a very detailed report published by the Global Trade Research Initiative which tries to identify the potential impacts of the tariff. The report also suggests three key strategies to protect the Indian economy from suffering greater impacts. The first strategy is, of course, to negotiate with the US and try and reduce tariffs on some of the US imports. And we have discussed this earlier, right? India could propose reducing tariffs on certain US imports, especially for those which do not hurt the domestic industries. In fact, quite recently, India just reduced the tariffs on the US motorbikes like Harley Davidson that we discussed and the US whiskies. And this implies that negotiations are possible. Meanwhile, India should also focus on innovation and technology so that the Indian products are also competitive and appealing to the Indian consumers. If you see China, this is what it is doing. The current budget in China focuses on innovation and manufacturing of high-end quality products. This is contrary to China's age-old principle of manufacturing low-quality products in large volumes. And this is in fact is the need of the hour in India because domestic products of Indian industries will compete with the US products if we reduce the import duties on US products. For example, the Indian whiskey will compete with the US whiskey. Indian motorbikes will compete with the US motorbikes because the price differences will not be significant between these two now. The second strategy that India could take is to take retaliatory measures. So India could refuse unfair trade concessions and impose counter tariffs, just like China did in the US China trade war that is ongoing. But again, that means manufacturing high end quality products driven by innovation that could compete globally. Like now, we need cars or agri products or chat GPT or a DeepSeek that could compete globally in the global market along with the products released from China or USA. So it is now the apt time for India to diversify and look out for new markets and invest in innovation and research and development. India has three choices. First is to negotiate smartly. Second is to retaliate strategically. And third is to strengthen the local industries and local consumption in India. This will reduce India's dependence on US exports and Indian economy will thrive. Which path do you think that India will take? Let me know in the comments. So don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon to have more deep dives into global economy and to know India's economic future.